Did you really think we were inviting you, Mother, to our dinner party? There's no seat prepared for you at the table. You're not family, after all." Just as Mary said, there were only 3 seats at the table. It was clear from the beginning they intended to exclude me. Realizing it was all going exactly as Mary had planned, I trembled with anger and frustration. Unable to bear it any longer, I decided to leave. As I turned to go, Mary handed something to my grandson and sent him walking over to me. My grandson approached, holding a roll of packing tape. He handed it to me quickly, then ran back to Mary as if escaping. "It's a present from your grandson. Use it to start packing for your move. You're not family, so please, leave this house as soon as possible." It was obvious my grandson hadn't come up with this gift on his own. Mary had clearly orchestrated it. Being told so bluntly to leave made everything clear to me. The real reason for this dinner party was to harass me and drive me out of that house. They assumed the house was in my name and planned to live there without me. Understanding their intentions, I decided to move out as they wished. But simply leaving would mean letting Mary's plan succeed too easily. I began to think of how I could retaliate. Suddenly, I came up with an idea. "Oh, so you realized I'm not family anymore? Did you find out that I secretly removed myself from the family registry?" I responded with a calm expression, and the couple looked confused. Neither of them seemed to understand what removal from the family registry meant, so I explained it to them casually. "I've removed myself from your family registry. Legally, I'm no longer your parent or anything else to you. Since you've been so unkind to me, I quietly handle the paperwork on my own." Upon hearing my words, they seemed genuinely shocked. In reality, I hadn't removed myself, and even doing so wouldn't sever the parent-child relationship. I remembered a conversation with a friend about inheritance issues where we joked about removing certain family members from the registry. I decided to use the idea here as a bluff. I never imagined it would surprise them this much. Seeing their reaction, I decided to tease them a bit more. "I'll leave everything to Sean. Someone who treats me like this won't get a penny of my inheritance." I said this while observing their reactions. Ken started panicking, while Mary shouted, "I didn't know you could remove someone from the registry. What will we do if we can't inherit the house?" Mary scolded Ken, who seemed at a loss for what to do. But it was clear that she was the mastermind behind trying to drive me out. "Why are you so flustered? Isn't this what you wanted? I'm leaving the house as you wished, so you should be happier." I spoke with mock cheerfulness, but Mary's face twisted with frustration. "Why did you act on your own? Don't you want to live with your grandson?" Mary assumed I would want to live with my grandson, but he wasn't attached to me. Even if we lived together, I didn't find much joy in it. Besides, Sean would soon marry, and I'd likely have another grandchild on the way. My indifferent attitude seemed to unnerve Mary. "What are we supposed to do if you leave? You're not going to charge us rent, are you?" Hearing her words, I briefly considered demanding a high rent. But I figured they wouldn't pay. This house is meant for Sean. Since he's getting married soon, it's perfect for a newlywed couple. I said this jokingly, but Mary seemed to take it seriously. She immediately pulled out her phone and started making a call. Curious, I listened in and realized she was calling her mother. "Mom, we're in big trouble. She's saying we're going to be kicked out of the house. What should we do?" Mary's mother seemed shocked. Her loud voice boomed through the phone, loud enough for me to hear. "What do you mean kicked out now? I already started clearing out unnecessary items since you said you'd drive her out." Mary's mother had apparently taken my eviction as a given and was preparing to move in. She even planned to terminate the lease on her current house. Mary began shouting back. "Don't jump to conclusions, Mom. I only said we were close to getting her out." Their heated argument continued over the phone, Listening to them, I started to understand where Mary's audacious nature came from. Realizing her mother was now planning to move in, Mary began to panic even more. "Everyone, stop making decisions without me. How did things turn into such a mess?" With that, she slammed her phone shut and stormed out of the room. Left behind, my grandson began to cry. Ken picked him up and chased after Mary, leaving the restaurant entirely. The staff, startled by the commotion, came over to check on me. I was left sitting alone in a room with a reservation for 3. I thought for a moment and decided to call Sean. I invited him and his fiancée to join me. Thankfully, they were free and arrived quickly. The 3 of us ended up enjoying the meal together. When Sean arrived, he laughed as I recounted what had happened. "So they really didn't know about the family registry thing, huh? I'm not too clear on the rules myself, but cutting off a legal parent-child relationship is pretty rare. I don't quite understand either." I hadn't understood it until a friend explained it to me during a conversation about inheritance. Apparently, removing someone from the registry has no effect on inheritance rights. Mary and Ken had taken my made-up story at face value. Thanks to that, I also learned that Mary's mother had designs on the house. Sean's fiancée expressed concern. "What if they find out it was all a bluff?" I reassured her. "Oh, don't worry. No matter what happens, I'll never hand over that house to them." Sean nodded in agreement. Despite everything, I enjoyed a lovely meal with Sean and his fiancée. When I returned home, no one else was there. Mary's mother had shouted about canceling her lease, so I assumed they were explaining the situation to her. I decided, that night, that I would leave the house the next day. The next morning, before Ken and Mary returned, I called Sean. I told him I was ready to move out and asked if he could come to help. The night before, we had already discussed the idea of me moving into Sean's place. He arrived quickly to help me pack and move. As we were loading the last of my belongings, Ken and Mary finally returned. "Sean, what are you doing here? Are you trying to throw us out of the house?" Mary's voice was shrill and panicked as she confronted Sean. She seemed to take my previous statement about giving the house to Sean seriously. I sighed, then turned to her. "Calm down. You can stay here. But from now on, you're on your own. Manage the house and all its expenses yourselves." Mary's expression shifted from fear to relief. But Ken looked confused, unsure why I had suddenly changed my mind. Mary, however, wasted no time regaining her usual attitude. "If you were going to let us stay, you should have just said so from the start. We weren't planning to leave anyway. This house is ours now." With her usual arrogance, Mary strutted into the house with my grandson. Ken hesitated for a moment, then asked me nervously, "Mom, you're not going to charge us rent, right? I mean, even if you've cut ties with us, we were still family once, weren't we?" Ken still believed my fabricated story about cutting family ties. It amazed me that he hadn't thought to verify it himself. Sean, struggling to suppress laughter, chimed in. "Actually, Mom and I are both cut off now, so technically, we're not family anymore. And just so you know, this house is mine in the future." Hearing this, Ken looked devastated. I was about to feel sorry for him when he blurted out something absurd. "Fine, but at least leave me your inheritance. It's not fair if Sean gets everything." He even begged me to continue paying the utility bills since they couldn't afford them. I was completely exasperated. "Why should I, a stranger, cover your bills? From now on, you're on your own. Pay your rent and utilities yourselves." With that, I left the house and moved in with Sean. At Sean's place, his fiancée helped me unpack and settle in. Do you think Ken and Mary can actually manage that house? Sean asked with a wry smile. I wasn't so sure, but I figured they would manage somehow, especially with Mary's mother moving in. About a month later, I received a phone call from Mary. Are you seriously going to charge us rent, Natalie? What kind of mother does that? Her voice was loud and indignant, but I kept calm. You still don't understand, do you? That house isn't even mine. It's a rental property. I never owned it in the first place. Mary went silent for a moment before shouting again. What? Are you saying you've been lying to us this whole time? So we wouldn't have inherited it anyway? Her voice wavered, and it was clear she was shocked. I decided it was time to tell her everything. Yes, I lied. The house isn't mine, and I'm not legally disconnected from the family either. I just wanted to scare you a little because of how terribly you've treated me. Honestly, it seems like it worked. Oh, you had no right to deceive us. Her indignation was almost amusing. I continued. Let's not forget you lied about the dinner party to humiliate me. So I say we're even. Mary had no response to that, but her mother didn't hold back. Oh, you're cruel, Natalie. How dare you play games with my daughter like this? We're coming over right now, and you'd better apologize. With that, she hung up abruptly. I wasn't exactly worried. Sean and his fiancée were home with me, so I knew I had support. Not long after, Mary, her mother, Ken, and my grandson arrived. We won't pay rent, and you'll keep covering the bills. Your son doesn't earn enough, so it's your responsibility. Her demands were absurd, but Sean calmly stepped in. People living in the house are responsible for its costs. The issue isn't Ken's income, but your reckless spending. Mary's mother turned red with rage and shouted back. Natalie, you're the worst. I can't believe you lied to your own family. I stayed composed. I lied about the house and family ties, but only because you tricked me first. So, let's call it even. Mary fumed but couldn't argue. Her mother, however, continued yelling. You need to take responsibility for all of this. Pay their rent, cover their bills, and apologize to my daughter. Before I could respond, Sean intervened again. If you can't afford to live there, you should move somewhere cheaper. Ken, you need to step up and handle your own life. Ken surprisingly stood up for himself. I'm done, Mom. Mary and I are divorcing. I'll take care of our son, but this isn't working anymore. His words stunned everyone. For once, he was asserting himself against Mary and her controlling mother. Ken's declaration left Mary and her mother speechless. I couldn't help but feel proud of him for finally standing up for himself. How dare you, Ken? This is your fault, Natalie. You encouraged him to do this, didn't you? I shook my head calmly. No, this was Ken's decision. Perhaps you should listen to him for once. Ken, you can't be serious. What about our son? I'll take responsibility for him. But this marriage is over. Mary's face turned pale as she processed his words. Her mother, however, refused to let it end there. Oh, you can't just walk away, Ken. We'll take you to court for everything you've got. Go ahead. I'll pay what I owe, but I'm done being controlled. His voice was steady, showing a confidence I'd rarely seen in him before. I glanced at Sean, who nodded in approval. Mary's mother realized she was losing her grip and turned to me. Natalie, you have to do something. Fix this. I smiled faintly and shook my head. This is for them to sort out. I won't interfere. The room fell into an awkward silence. Finally, Mary burst into tears and stormed out of the house. Her mother, dragging my grandson along, followed close behind, shouting angrily as she left. Ken stayed behind, looking both relieved and exhausted. Thank you, Mom. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to make things right from now on. I placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled. It's never too late to turn things around. Just focus on being a good father to your son. Ken nodded, his determination clear in his eyes. Over the next few weeks, the divorce was finalized. Ken agreed to pay child support and settled his debts. Mary moved back in with her mother, and their relationship grew even more strained. Meanwhile, I fully settled into my life with Sean and his wife. The peaceful atmosphere of our home was a stark contrast to the chaos of the past. One day, Sean's wife shared some wonderful news. "Oh, Natalie, we're expecting a baby." Tears of joy welled up in my eyes as I embraced her. My heart swelled with hope for the bright future ahead. After everything we'd been through, we had finally found happiness.